Alrighty, I am pleased to be joined by Anthony K from the Sports Fluent Podcast. How's it going, Anthony?
Hey, I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I am doing great. Again, thanks for coming on the pod. I really appreciate it. If you want to talk before we start answering some questions, if you want to introduce yourself and talk about your podcast and all that good stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I actually have a couple of things on the go. I have the Sports Fluent Podcast, which is kind of our main show, which is a weekly kind of all sports encompassing. But on our YouTube channel, also named Sports Fluent, we've got Monsters of the Midway, which is a Bears podcast, 6 Fluent Minutes, which is a Toronto Raptors podcast, and The Lake Show, which is a Lakers specific podcast. Plus, got so much going on. Fluent and Chill, which is a show I do with Chilltown Hoops 2 times a week, Wednesdays and Fridays, and we do a basketball show and an NFL show as well.
Oh, okay. That's cool that you have a Toronto Raptors show. I'm actually a huge Kawhi Leonard fan, and when the Raptors won the title, I was really excited. So, anyways, now as we start the show again, thanks for coming on. Do you want to, I know the Olympics have happened about a week and a half ago, and I really haven't talked much about it. I've kind of wanted to, but what did you think of the Olympics just in general this year?
Well, I'll give you in general the Olympics, I guess. So this year, I enjoy the Olympics. I have a family that is really into the Olympics, so we really get into it. My brother also works the Olympics, so we also had him there showing us some inside scoop of what was going on as one of the few people that got to be there because there was no spectators. I think that really affected the Olympics, not having fans in the stands. I think it hurt the Olympics maybe more than any other sport, because it's kind of that, once at every 4-year event that people really get into it. In general on the Olympics, however, I don't know if it's a bone to pick with the IOC or whoever's in control of this, but, I was mentioning to you earlier, it started with 43 events. Now there's 339. And, when you have events, and I'm not saying the people who do this aren't incredible athletes, but power walking, table tennis, 3-on-3 basketball, the list probably goes on a little bit. I think there's maybe 2 times too many events. I think if they condensed it and had maybe 150 events and really, created, a really condensed format as well, I think they'd get some of that viewership back. I felt like this year's games, I don't know, maybe it was because of COVID or the fans in the stands. I feel a piece of it is that there's just too much. There's too many events, too many things going on. And I think it takes away from people's focus.
Yeah, and I think, you said there's so many events now, and it's crazy because a lot of the events that you see, most of the time you don't pay attention until the Olympics, and there's just some that you have no idea, like some things you just had no idea that they were actually a sport. And I was talking to you earlier about skateboarding. You said you enjoy it, but it's not really an Olympic sport. That's why there's the X Games, and I can really understand that. But what do you exactly, or do you think? Let me rephrase that question. Do you think they should put skateboarding in the next Olympics, or just, get rid of it altogether?
It's one of those ones where I'm really torn because what's the definition of an Olympic event? So I think we need to clarify that. And here's why I'm torn, because I really enjoy watching skateboarding. I think it's amazing. But should it be in the Olympic Games? I don't know the answer to that. It might be one of those cusp ones where, if there's room for it, let's put it in. And I think the reason they put it in is, you have snowboarding, which people pushed back on the Winter Games. But that's been a huge success. So, let me make a stand. I'll say no. I don't want skateboarding. I love skateboarding. I don't think it should be in the Olympics. But I think there's other things that need to go first. Like I said, the 3-on-3 basketballs. I think golf, right? That's just not something I personally feel is an Olympic event.
Yeah,
and sorry, I'm gonna add something to it here. Sorry to cut you off there before you start, but I think it also takes away from, the Olympians. Like, if you were to watch the Olympics, I want your focus to be on, this. Now in this case, we'll probably talk about Simone Biles in a second, but like the Simone Biles and you mentioned a swimmer earlier who kind of dominated. I forget the name. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but hopefully you can fill us in with that swimmer. But I think it takes away because now you have professional golfers, professional basketball players, these professional athletes who are coming in and competing. And I think, if you look at the Olympics, were people watching TV USA basketball, or were they watching, the Olympic gymnastics team? What should they have been watching? Well, they should have been watching the Olympic gymnasts, because you don't get to see them very often. You see those basketball players, and I love basketball, but you see them all the time. You see them all year round, every year. You don't go out of your way, I think, to see some of these other Olympians, and I think it takes away from that, what it is, that amateur sport.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the one big thing, too, that didn't really exactly, or why I wasn't super pumped, and a lot of people weren't pumped either, was just because of no fans. And I think that's really disappointing. And hopefully there's fans at least for next year's Winter Olympics. That would be nice. But, I think you're right, too. And I think at the same time, the golf is an interesting one, too, because you say that it's like every week you see those top golfers, and it seems like almost every country plays golf. And I think you did point out something really good. Like, I think that golf is more of an Olympic sport that happens every week, that shouldn't happen every 4 years. Like, that should be in the Olympics. So I agree with what you're saying there. And of course the skateboarding thing, just because there's already the X Games, and surfing's another sport too that I don't know if should be added in the Olympics, but at the same time, you don't exactly watch surfing until the Olympics. So, I mean, I understand what you're trying to say. Now, you did mention recently.
I will say this. Sorry to cut you off, but I would say that, like, surfing and skateboarding, I would put them in ahead of, like, golf and tennis, right? Because both are things, again, that we see. There's a whole year of that stuff all the time. So I just don't feel it needs to be there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And yeah, tennis is another sport too that you don't really pay attention to in the Olympics, because, I mean, do we really care who wins the gold medal? Because, and plus this year there wasn't much of the big time, tennis players this year playing, because of course, Roger Federer didn't compete. Just all these other players did not compete at it. Like, and Serena Williams wasn't in there, and just it seemed like there wasn't as big of names this year in tennis. And again, tennis is like golf too, where you already see a plethora of every year, or every week. So it doesn't really. I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned it earlier. Simone Biles was kind of the big story of the Olympics. What did you exactly take out of the whole deal? Because it was kind of a hard situation to really understand. But what did you actually take out of the whole Simone Biles situation?
I felt that we forget sometimes that athletes are first and foremost human beings. Mm-hmm. And we just want them, we have this flashback to, like, Mary Lou Retton with the broken foot or the broken ankle or broken leg, whatever. And she goes out and she competes and she wins the gold. I saw people when Simone Biles came out and they were showing this clip of Mary Lou saying, "Oh, that's what an athlete should be." Simone Biles, whatever was going on with her, I think there were some family issues. I think there was a death in the family. There's some, I believe it's ADHD medicine, like, I forget the name of the medicine that she's supposed to be on, but it's illegal in Tokyo, so she couldn't take it. So there was a lot going on with her. And for her to come out and say, listen, I'm not mentally kind of in a state where I can compete at my best, and for the betterment of the team and everything, I'm going to step away. People saw that as weakness. And my old school mentality was like, rub some dirt on it and just go. But then, when you think about it for a minute, you're like, you know what? I think it was just as brave of her to come out and say, I can't do this. And as fans, we want athletes to just, be these machines that just go out and compete and just forget about life. Just go compete and do what you're supposed to do. That's what you get paid to do, or that's why we watch you. And I get that. And we lose a sense of, the human aspect of it. And everyone who said she should have just, grinned and bared it, I asked, what if it was your kid? What if it was your kid that said to you, you know what, if I'm in a mental state right now where, and I'm not saying this to Simone, I'm just saying in general, I'm in a mental state right now that if I were to go out and try to compete, I don't think I could recover from that. I might fall into deep depression, especially if I lose. Or if I win. Like, I don't even know if it has to do with winning or losing. Would you send your kid out and say, I don't care, just go? I would say 90% of parents would say no. 10% would say, yeah, just go do it, I don't care. But I think the majority would say no. If you know yourself and you know that you have whatever mental health issues that you have that you need to deal with and you can't go play your best, then don't. Right? If she had a sprained ankle and said, I tried, I went out and I did a backflip, and when I landed, it shot pain through my whole body that made me want to vomit. You'd say, okay, well, you're hurt, don't do it. Why is that ankle more important than your brain, than your mental health? So that's why I definitely sided with her. Now, I'm not saying, I also don't want to go too far and say, oh my God, she's a hero, right? Oh, how courageous of this person to say I can't do it. Because you know what? I'd say put that into perspective too. She had an issue. She made the best decision for her. I applaud her for that, and we move on.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that people are dealing with that we have no idea about. And again, we didn't really know the whole extent to the matter. So it's kind of like if you go out there and, go on Twitter, and this is what I hate about Twitter. Mostly it's just people, trashing other people. And it's just like, there's just other things that we don't know that are dealing with. But again, we don't know the whole situation. So we really shouldn't comment on it if we don't know what's happening. So again, it was kind of sad to see, because she probably at the end of the day, she probably could be at one time the greatest Olympians ever, but it just kind of, we just don't know the whole extent. It's just kind of a situation that we kind of should just kind of back away from, I think. So
yeah, she knows herself, right? She knows herself better than anybody else. And if she felt she can't do it, then that's her decision to make. I'm not going to hold a grudge to someone who says, listen, I'm not at that point where I can do it. It's your decision.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, she's in control of herself. She can make the decisions that she wants to. So now as we're going to continue on the Olympics for a little bit, we go on to the U.S. men's basketball team, and they won the gold, but they kind of squeaked out a win against France. But it felt like if the U.S. didn't win a gold, we would be talking more about it, just because U.S. every year usually, or every other year, wins the gold, or every Olympics wins the gold medal. But do you think if U.S. wouldn't have won the gold, do you think possibly Greg Popovich would have been removed from the coach and they would have replaced him with someone else?
I think they would have, and I think it would have been a bad decision. And now, listen, Pop, I love Pop. I think he's, one of the greatest coaches of all time. Now, he's also into his 70s, and I'm not saying that, it's passed him by, but, someone gave me this, so I'm stealing someone else's line here, but they used a good analogy when they said, it's kind of like your computer software. There comes a point where it's still good, it still works, but you should probably upgrade. And I think Pop's getting close to that. He's not there yet, don't get me wrong. But if they lose, I think you don't want to blame the players. And that's the problem. No one's going to say, it's the player's fault. It's the easiest thing to blame the coach. And just think about any team. Who's the first person to get fired if a team underachieves? They don't trade all the players. It's typically the coach that gets fired in most cases. And they bring in a new voice and they say, this is going to change, the culture of our team. Even though in most cases it's that talent. In terms of Team USA, they got very lucky. One, I think KD just kind of took over and said, listen, I'm going to take us home. And the rest of the players said, here, just take us home. If you watch the game, he became that guy that took over the team. And they had enough talent that if they kind of gave one person a clear lead, that they were going to win. But I think Team USA struggles from something that the other teams don't. If you look at the other clubs, the other countries, they have a core of players that play together every kind of off season. A lot of them play in some other leagues together, the ones that aren't NBA players. They play on the same teams, whether it be in a Euro League or Russian League, whatever. And so with Team USA, you've got a bunch of players who are all in the NBA. They all play on different teams with a couple of exceptions. There's a few, but they don't commit to that summer, whether it's the FIBA, the World Championships, the Olympics. They don't commit to it. And if you go back, and I mean way back, the USA was struggling. First, there was the Olympics. I guess there was the Olympics where they boycotted. And then I think it was 80. What year was it? 1980. Where they weren't, and then in 84, they bring back this, team of college athletes who win the gold. Then 84, not that great. 92, the off-season stuff. And then 92 is the dream team, because they realized, oh, you know what? These other countries are sending professionals. We need to send a professional. So they create the dream team. Team wins the gold. And then they win the next one, I think, right? And then what happens, I think, around 2000, 2004, because they had won the gold again multiple times, I think the attention gets pulled away. And they say, okay, we'll just send players, we're fine. And they just threw a ragtag team together. Remember, I think it was LeBron's first Olympics, and they don't win. And I think, or it's the FIBA one too, they don't win. And so now they're like, hey guys, we need a commitment. I think the team was called the Redeem Team. And they said, we need you guys to, to say, hey, we're part of this for the next 8 years. And it's not all of them, it's not all 12, 15, but there's a core group of like 6 or 8. I think it was like Kobe, LeBron, Carmelo. There's a group of them. And they came together and said, okay, we're going to commit to doing this. And guess what happened, right? They come together, they play a little bit in the off season, they play a couple of world champs, and now they're unstoppable again. And I think they were unstoppable. What happened now? Again, we started to lose the attention. We started to pull back. And now it was, I think that it was good that they lost those games in the exhibition games to France, to Australia, because it made them go, oops, hey, we can't just coast. We can't just rely on our talent. So I think more so than Greg Popovich, and sorry, I feel like I've rambled a little bit here, but more so than Greg Popovich, I think they need to get a commitment from some of those young guys to say, hey, we need you to commit to, the World Championship and the Olympics. At least give us that 4-year commitment that you're going to do these events so that we can get you guys playing together and understanding. Because Olympic basketball is different, or international basketball is different. There's some rules changes that, they need to be ready for. And I think that's what hurt them in the exhibition games. They were still getting used to those rules.
Yeah, and the rules, too, are similar to, or at least other countries, they play similar more to international, or they play not international. International plays more to college rules than the NBA. And you could definitely tell when the U.S. was, or the U.S. men's basketball was playing, there was a lot more, they weren't getting the calls they normally get. And again, it was similar to college basketball where everything's more of half court instead of full court. Like that was what international basketball is. And I think, and what I've also noticed is international basketball seems to be a little more tougher than the type of what the NBA runs. So it's interesting how that works.
Yeah, they have 3 rules. If I could jump in and say that there's 3 rules that I think really affected the U.S. Well, look, there's 2 things that are outliers, which is, superstars don't get the foul. Right? That just doesn't happen. You're not going to get fouled because you look like you got fouled. They're not going to call. And the travel, they are way stricter. There's no gather step, right? You get your 2 steps. Anything else is travel. You saw a lot of travel calls. But the 3 big rule changes are handcuffing is still allowed. Right? Which takes some of those players back. They didn't play in the 90s. So when we talk about 90s basketball, checking, that's still there. There's the defensive 3-second, which was huge. In 2001, the NBA got rid of defensive 3 seconds. And what it did was they wanted this to happen. It opened up the lane, and because a center, your 7'2" center couldn't just stand under the rim and contest and block shots. They had to get out of the key every 3 seconds. So it gave perimeter players an opportunity to drive and either get some great dunks, drive in a dish, whatever happens. That play now becomes more important because you can't do that. In international, you can have that 3 seconds. So the hand check in the 3 seconds, and then the goaltending rule. The second it touches the cylinder, you can then go up and grab it, even if it's still within that kind of invisible, infinite cylinder. Whereas in the NBA, obviously, you can't touch it if it's within that invisible cylinder. So I think those 3 things they didn't realize because I saw a couple of them where they had a shot, it bounced off the rim, you'd see the international player go and scoop it out, and there would be this pause where they'd look and be like, "Hey, no, that's legal." Oh, okay, and they're already now running down the court. So there's a couple of moments like that too. So those are the things you got to be aware of as you're playing those rules.
Yeah, it's just totally different. And I think, too, at the same time, like I said, superstars, they didn't get the calls. And I think they were kind of wondering, like, this is just different. I think it took them time to get used to. And I think I noticed, too, Damian Lillard did not play very good that I noticed. Like, I think he's the best point guard in the league, and he did not play well. I think mostly Kevin Durant kind of carried that team a little bit. And I think now we're realizing that Kevin Durant probably is the best basketball player in the world. Or I think he's surpassed LeBron at least. But, I mean, I think Kevin Durant, again, carried that team. It's just, like I said, international basketball is so much different. And it just goes to show you that you have to have some type of team chemistry, as you were pointing out. And again, it's a lot more tougher. The calls are different. It's a different game almost. So again, and as we know, a lot of the players that come out of Europe and come out of China and stuff like that, and Australia even too, they're actually really good. So like you said, Luka comes out of Slovenia, really good. Jokic comes out of Serbia, really good. It just goes to show you that international basketball is a lot better than what it was or what it used to be. So
the rest of the world credit, they're nowhere near where the U.S. is. But that gap is definitely has closed, and that's, I think, good for basketball, right? It became such a global game, and if Team USA just went out and killed everybody by 40 points all the time, it loses some of its allure. So I think the fact that you can have upsets and these other teams are getting better, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think again, it makes the game more relevant, and I think what basketball is probably the second or third most popular sport in the world. So it just goes to show you that again, everything is just. The U.S. is head and shoulders is number one, but they're not necessarily head and shoulders as they used to be. So again, I know we would talk a lot about the Olympics, but do you think they need to add any sports in the Olympics? Like maybe add. I don't know. It seems like football is more of kind of a few countries play it. But what do you think let me phrase that. Do you think the Olympics should add any other sports that they don't have right now?
I'm not saying no, but I'm saying until they get rid of a bunch of things that I think they have to get rid of, I don't even want to have that conversation. I don't know if you have any. Maybe you could throw out something. I'll tell you yes or no. But like you kind of said, football. Football's an American sport. No one else really plays football, and they could put teams together, but it wouldn't even be fair, right? To play football. And you're probably not going to get a lot of NFL players because the risk of injury is so much higher. What other sports do you have? Soccer or football, right, depending on what part of the world you're in. They have the World Cup, they have the Euro Cup, they have their Super Bowl event every 4 years already, or they have their Olympic, I guess I should say, every 4 years already. So I know they do soccer in the Olympics too. Football, soccer, whatever. So I don't see. Is there something you can think of that you would put into the Olympics? I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Well, this is just kind of a shot in the dark, and I think I saw this on Instagram or something. Someone was saying that they should add motorsports in the Olympics, but you already have technically Formula One, which is all around the world. And I don't know. I don't know necessarily. I just kind of thought of that maybe, but
a little IndyCar and NASCAR and
yeah, exactly.
They'll probably try it. I will say this. The Olympics has tried things and taken them out if they failed. So I wouldn't be surprised if they tried. Probably Formula One makes the most sense because it's more of an international race than NASCAR. I wouldn't be surprised if they did that.
I would like to see a lot of the NASCAR drivers like Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson to actually go and abroad. I think 2020. I think the next time they can add something is in 2028, which would actually be in LA. So they would kind of be known. And of course, Kyle Larson I think is from Cali. I want to say, but so I wouldn't mind to see those. But you already have Formula One. I just can't think of any other sport. And again, football is more of just a one sport. They're trying to get internationally, but it's going to be a long time before people can actually get caught on with it. I just can't really see any other sports at the moment. So now as we go on to, I kind of want to talk more about, you said you're kind of into CFL a little bit, Canadian Football League. We haven't actually talked about this on this podcast, but I know the season just started. But right now, who is projected to win it all?
It's interesting with the CFL because there's so few teams. There's 9 teams in the league, and even the top team, which is right now Saskatchewan, the Rough Riders, I think would be my preseason pick, the Saskatchewan Rough Riders. It's so with only 9 teams, everybody has a shot. I'm going to give you kind of a basketball reference. When we talk about Bill Russell, the biggest kind of knock is, well, there's only 10 teams in the league, so he had it easier. I kind of think the opposite. With 10 teams in the league, or in this case 9, I think any team has a shot. So I think Saskatchewan has a shot at it. I think, we thought the CFL would be something different this year because taken the year off because of COVID, and then they had this partnership with the XFL, and whatever they're working on didn't come to fruition. So I feel like they just kind of threw out the product and said, "Hey, let's do this." And I actually wrote a pretty long letter to the CFO of the CFL saying, "Hey, you have a problem. You have a financial problem, which is the CFL is one of the few leagues that is trying to make it with getting people into the stands." Right? If you look at the other major sports in North America, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the common denominator for their success and failure is TV deals. And then the secondary thing is how they get people to gamble on them. Let's be honest. I know sometimes people hear gambling and they're like, "Oh, no, we know that gambling is happening in all this sport." Listen, you take fantasy football. I guarantee you can find 1 million people who watch football because they're in a fantasy league, not because they were football fans, or NFL fans. So that's where I think, I know I'm going off topic of the game, the CFL games, but I think that's what worries me about the CFL's future. But back to answer your question, I've got the Rough Riders as my early pick, and they're 2-0. So so far so good.
Yeah, I know. Was it the last time they had a Grey Cup? I think Winnipeg won, right? The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I know they've won what? They've won the most, I know they've won a lot of Grey Cups.
It's gonna be. I think it's between one of those two. It might be Saskatchewan, but the west part, we call anything. You should let me give you. I'll give you a geography lesson in Canada. Anything that's not Toronto, which ask anybody outside of Toronto, they hate Toronto because it's like we look at it like the center of the universe. Anything west of Toronto, so I mean Manitoba, which is the next province over, is considered Western Canada. So it's like Toronto and then Western. So Western Canada is really like traditional and into their CFL football, right? The Blue Bombers, the Edmonton, I guess Elks now. I mentioned the Calgary Stampeders, the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, the BC Lions. Those are actually really big draws, and so they're the ones that typically the Argonauts in Toronto. If they're good, they have some people go to games. If they're not good, not so much. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's Winnipeg or Saskatchewan, but yeah, one of those two I think is your all-time leader, Grey Cup leaders.
Yeah, I've noticed too with the CFL, and what I've heard a lot is it has more of an older demographic, and a lot of the younger generation isn't really appealing to the CFL. I've noticed that too, and I don't know what the CFL necessarily needs to do, because at one time they were really popular. I think back in the 80s or 70s and 80s when Warren Moon was playing, they were really popular. And of course, he won, 5 Grey championships, so he was dominant. And I feel like, it just doesn't seem like there's that younger demographic. And I don't think you said fantasy football, of course, is huge here in the U.S. or in the NFL, but I didn't think the CFL had fantasy football, but that would actually be a great idea.
They have it.
Oh, they do?
They do, but I don't think they do a good enough job marketing their individual players, right? Like if you think of fantasy football, and that's I should mention that's another segment of Sports Fluent that we're starting, which is Fluent in Fantasy. So it's going to be a weekly fantasy tips on football. So if you think about it, if I name you, I don't know, if you're a big fantasy football guy, if I say, hey, I need your advice, I need a running back, right? I'm thinking of picking Delvin Cook, David Montgomery, or Nick Chubb. Who should I take first? You probably know all three of those guys. Mm-hmm. If I were to throw out 3 CFL running backs, and I'm not you specific because you don't follow it, but to any Canadian football player or Canadian football fan, not many people are going to know them, right? Like there's going to be a diehard core, don't get me wrong, but the fringe people, the casual fan, won't know 3 running backs from 3 different teams. Now, granted, it's not a very run first type of play because there's only 3 downs, but they're not going to know that. And that's the difference where, you can go to someone now who plays fantasy who doesn't follow, the NFL football all that well, but they'll know those three very easily because, they're first, second, third round running backs. I need to know them. So I think they haven't done that. I actually, in my letter, I'm not going to go through, probably take too long to go through it all, but I gave them things like, hey, market the players, market that fantasy piece to it, add in-game gambling. Whether you're watching at home or in the stadium where you can bet 5 cents on run or pass, 5 yards plus or minus, like just everything to get people actually watching the game. Because here's the funny part. Have you ever watched a full CFL game? It is so entertaining, right? Because the field is bigger. There's only 3 downs, so it's a lot of passing. It's high scoring. It's actually everything, that, some people will complain about the NFL that's, it's so slow and they're running the ball. And, now offensive has changed a little bit. They're throwing a lot more. But that was the CFL 20 years ago. Like if you look at Warren Moon, when you look at his professional yards, right, he's, up there at the top of all-time passing list, but some of that was in the CFL. It's because it's 3 downs. You got to throw. And when you have a field that's 110 yards, right, because there's that 10 yards in the middle. It doesn't stop at the 50. It goes like 50, 45, 50. It was 10 years ago. The end zones are bigger. There's all these things, so there's more room to make those plays. And, the motion is different. More players can be in motion to kind of get a running start to the line of scrimmage. There's stuff that if you watch it, you're like, wow, this is really entertaining. It's different than the NFL, but still very entertaining. And that's where I say if you give people a reason to watch, then they will, especially the younger people, they'll become fans.
Yeah, I totally understand. I totally agree. And yeah, because like I said, sometimes the NFL, there's teams where they'll still run the ball, and it kind of gets boring. And plus with the flags and everything, that just, that makes the game less. And when it's run and gun, it's a lot more exciting, a lot more, because I remember, was it in 2018 when the Chiefs played the Rams? I think it was 54-51. That was a super exciting game. And whenever you watch a Big 12 game, was it Oklahoma and Texas Tech? This is back in the day when Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes were still in college. But it was super exciting. There was no defense, but they were super exciting because, again, I think the scores were in the 70s. So,
look,
I totally
agree. Is it great historical smash mouth football? No. But are you really likely to see a 47-42 game that you're going to be like, wow, that was a lot of fun to watch? That's entertaining? Yeah.
Yeah. So, before we kind of switch gears from the CFL, I know there was, and as you mentioned, there's only 9 teams, and the CFL is really small. And I know there was rumors before the pandemic where the CFL was trying to expand. Is there any chance within the next 5 years the CFL gets one new franchise maybe?
I hope so. I think that, like I said, there's enough. Listen, I have an issue with the CFL, and they're doing it a little different this year, but well, no, the season's gonna blend into the NFL season again. And I think the best chance the CFL has, so one, to expand and to be more, listen, for them to really succeed, I guess it depends. If I was running the CFL, I'd want it to expand to let all of North America really be something that they watch. So I would move it and start it, either right after, a few weeks after the Super Bowl or a couple of weeks after the draft, and make it like a summer league. Because, look, I know it's not ideal, but I'd like to have 2-way contracts where an NFL player who's trying to rehab or trying to prove themselves, a veteran guy who's trying to get back on a team, right, can go play in the CFL for the summer, show their NFL team what they're capable of, and then maybe get called up. When the way the seasons blend in, that's not going to happen. So that's the first thing I would do. I would move the games to Sunday. I don't know if you've looked in the CFL schedule. There's games Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And they still try to do it by calling it week 1, week 2, week 3. But I mean, if you want younger fans to start, getting into your game, you have to make some concessions for them. And the 2 things you need to do is make every game on a Sunday afternoon so that it can be a family event. So the older generation that still loves the CFL can take their younger, kids, grandkids, whatever, to that game. The other thing is, obviously, stream it. Stream it everywhere, right? Get a deal with YouTube and just stream every second of every game, mic'd up, behind the scenes. Heck, coaches rants in the locker room. Just give more access and stream it and say, hey, this is how people, cable television is on a steady decline for years, because everyone's streaming. So tap into that. If you do that stuff, then you could put the league in a financial position where they could expand. Now, they tried to expand into the U.S. A while ago. It didn't work. But I think it was the same game with the same bad decisions So, the expansion the timing was bad. You need to have the infrastructure first before you can expand.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like maybe make it more of a, I guess it'd be more of a, if it was a two-way, if you let players have a two-way contract, it'd be kind of like a minor league system. But,
Yeah.
And then of course,
now, I don't want to call it that because
Yeah.
then you'll diminish what the CFL is. And the CFL still is a very unique but professional football league. So you don't want to take away from that. I think, and that maybe is the reason why they don't want to have these two ways. But, you don't want it to be like seen as like a farm club or a summer league. I understand that you don't want to do that. But for the betterment of your league, I think it's fair to say, hey, now I think that's what they might be doing with the XFL. My idea for the XFL when they merged, the first thing I thought of actually before they merged, I kind of put it out there saying, hey, since the CFL hasn't played in a year and, the XFL, it was right after I think Danny Garcia and Dwayne Johnson bought them. I said they should merge, figure out a way. Now here's the problem because there's the 3 down versus 4 down, but they should create like the North American Football League, right? And then that could compete with the NFL, and then leave the CFL as a 3 down unique thing where it makes sense. That I don't think that's going to happen though. So yeah, back to the thing. Yeah, so Sunday streaming, make it more accessible. I think they still try to treat it like it's the NFL, and it's not. And I think that's why the XFL failed. Is they thought they could just step in day one and be the NFL. No, you can't. The NFL's been around for 100 and whatever years. They've kind of earned their stripes. You can't just jump in tomorrow and do the same thing.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying with the streaming and everything, because I think the MLB now streams live on YouTube, which is really fun to watch, because especially if you don't have cable or whatever. And then, of course, I understand what you're saying with the if you merge with the XFL and the CFL, maybe what you could do, I know the NFL used to do this back in the 60s when there was the NFL and AFL, and then they played in the Super Bowl, which was the champions of the NFL and the AFL. Maybe you could do that with the XFL, where the XFL champion plays against the CFL champion and make it some type of bowl or championship game. So I understand what you're saying. That's a great, observation. And I think more people would pay attention to the CFL, but I just think the CFL should start merging. I guess you just merge into other cities of Canada or provinces or whatever. You couldn't really go back to the US because it'd be much different, but I see what you're saying there. So yeah. And again, this has been kind of a long recording, but do you have any other, or do you have one take about the upcoming NHL season that you kind of want to mention before we end the interview?
Oh, NHL? Oh,
yep.
I still really like the. Well, I'll give you two things on the NHL. I still really like the Tampa Bay Lightning. I picked them 2 years ago. I picked them this year, so they made me look good 2 years in a row because. I always like being right. I will tell you when I'm right. I will try to be very quiet when I'm wrong. But I'm actually really excited. This is the one thing I would watch because there's a city in the U.S. that I absolutely love. I spent a lot of time there. I'm very angry to this day that they lost their NBA franchise. I still call the Oklahoma City Thunder. I still call them the Seattle Supersonics. I refuse to call them the Thunder. And they've got their Seattle Kraken, and they did their expansion draft, and with the early success of the Las Vegas Golden Knights, right in their first year, they were in the playoffs. They were deep into the playoffs. This year, they made some noise again in the playoffs. I think the Seattle team has a great fan base. Just think of every team, whether it's the Seahawks, the Supersonics when they were there. Let's be honest, right? The Supersonics are gone not because of their fans, not because no one was going to the games, right? It was politics, it was money, it was the stadium, it was the owner, it had nothing to do with the fans. I believe their soccer team is the Sounders, right? I was there, so I used to do a lot of work in Seattle, and there's the hotel's called the iCloud. It's right across the street from the stadium, and I didn't know that there was a Sounders game on when I arrived the day before. There was one the next day. But I'm telling you, when that game let out, there was a sea of that lime green that it took over downtown Seattle. And so their fans are so passionate in Seattle. It's such a good, it's just a great city, but it's such a great sports city. So I think you're going to see a Kraken team that's going to get, I'm not a fan of the name, by the way, but you're going to see a team that is going to have a lot of support. It's going to be really competitive right out of the gate if they followed anything from what Las Vegas did. And that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing next year in the NHL is how the Kraken develop. Like I said, because of the city and their ability to be a good team, right? Typically, you get an expansion team, and you're like, yeah, we'll see you in 10 years if you're any good. But these guys can be good right out of the gate.
Yeah, and the one thing about the Kraken, I think it's a very interesting name. I was very surprised when they chose the Kraken, but I do like the colors. I mean, it's that two different kinds of blue and the black. I do really like the colors, and I do think eventually the NBA within 10 years will go back to Seattle. There's been rumors with the Pelicans and stuff going to Seattle, maybe just getting a new expansion team there. But I do that would be interesting to see what the Kraken can do. And yeah, the fan base is huge in Seattle. And then, of course, Tampa Bay, as you said, doing a three-peat wouldn't be really surprising, but it would be very interesting to see. As we end the interview, and you kind of were mentioning a few things you had in store for the future before we started recording, but can you tell us more about that?
Well, we have another new show actually starting too called Table for One, which is a game show that's going to be bring 3 or 4 of your favorite sports content creators, podcasters together into one kind of game to see who knows the most. So we're really excited about that, and that's going to be coming up. It's premiering in 3 weeks, but you can find all of it on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at sports_fluent.
Okay. All right. Again, thanks for coming, Anthony. It's been a great talk. Again, I've enjoyed talking about sports, and of course, we finally got to talk about the Olympics, so that was great. And again, don't forget to check Anthony K, the Sports Fluent Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. Correct?
Correct. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's sportsfluent.com.
Okay. Yeah, go check that out. I'll put a link in the description down below. Again, thanks for coming on, Anthony, and have a wonderful night.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.